So Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. I will give you rest. Come, learn from me. I am gentle and lowly, and my burden is light." So come, lay your burdens down right now. Life is challenging. Life can be hard. But here we are in a house of prayer for all peoples. Lay your burdens down. Let's worship together in peace. Welcome to worship.
Nakunsadisa tala ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka. Tala ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka. Oh oh oh. Tala kakwange yeko. Tala kaisuko.
I thought you were taking markers.
Ikwalulendo keye wafanga sulu yentoto. Kakwena mutuko kwena nzambi ya kakako. Ilenda vanga bonzo meye. Ilenda vanga bonzo. Nakunsalisa ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka. Tala ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka. Oh oh. Tala kakwange yeko. Tala kaisuko. Otato nzambi ke kwalulendo ke wabanga zulu yentoto kakwena muntu ko wena nzambi yakakako ilenda vanga bonzo ngeye ilenda vanga bonzo namtsalisa ke nzambi kovona ni kaka ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka oh oh talaka kwange yeko talaka isuko nawe unsalise nzambi oh unsalise nzambi unsalise oh I need you Lord, need you now, I need you Lord, help me, I need you Lord, need you now, help me, I need you Lord. Oh na kutsabisa dala ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka. Dala ninge nzambi kovona ni kaka oh oh. Dala kakwange yeko. Dala kaisuko oh 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 oh. Nawe. Unsalise nzambi oh unsalise nzambi unsalise oh.
All right. Thank you. Awesome. So for our scripture today, we're in the very last book of the Bible, Revelation, and it's this spiritual vision. John of Patmos has a mystical vision. He's been exiled to this island as a prisoner, and the heavens open up, and we're at the point where he sees the New Jerusalem come down. Listen. And in the Spirit, he carried me away to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city of Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. It has the glory of God and a radiance like a rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It's got a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels. And at the gates are inscribed the names that are the names of the 12 tribes of the Israelites. And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and on them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel who was talking to me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls. The city had 4 equal sides, its length the same as its width. He measured the city, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. Its length and width and height are equal. So life creates intersections. Like if you run into a friend at an unexpected place, that's like an intersection. Or if you're talking to a stranger and they went to the same college as you, that's like an intersection. Or you're talking to your boss, it turns out he played football with your uncle, that's an intersection. By the way, Chiefs by 7. Chiefs by 7. I want to tell you about an intersection that took place for me last week. I was going to teach a class on the theology of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I was coming to the church from the other side of town because I had to prepare for the class. And I was driving by, Pershing Auditorium as it's coming down. And as I kind of looked at it, I thought empathetically of all the things that must have happened there and all the intersections, all those many years there. When I came to my study and I was reading old speeches of MLK to get ready for that course I was teaching. And as I was reading an old speech, I began to think in my mind, well, the guy I'm named after, Jim Thomas, was a friend of Martin Luther King's. So my dad was a Methodist minister in Iowa, and his best friend in ministry, another minister, was named Jim Thomas. Well, Jim Thomas would go on to be the first black Methodist bishop in the Midwest. But before he was elevated to bishop, he was a pastor, and he and my dad were really good buddies. So he had Jim Thomas baptize me, and they named me after Jim Thomas. And I knew Jim Thomas was a black preacher in the South, and that he had known Martin Luther King, so I started kind of thinking about that as I was reading this old speech. And then all of a sudden, in the speech, Martin Luther King is talking about how Jim Thomas is sitting next to him. His good friend, my good friend Jim Thomas is going to speak after I speak. And I'm going, whoa, that's crazy. And then as I go on reading the speech, at the end it says this speech was delivered in Pershing Auditorium in Lincoln, Nebraska. Did you remember Martin Luther King gave a speech here in 1965 to 5,000 Methodist youth workers? And I thought, man, these are just intersections. One of the reasons I love church is intersections happen here all the time. I see it when people are talking to each other. They find out they know similar people, or they make all these connections. Intersections make for community. I want to create an intersection right now. I want to bring Martin Luther King's favorite sermon into this room right now. There'll be an intersection because he's never preached it here, but he preached it a lot of places. It was his favorite sermon. He preached it when he was a candidate to be pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist in Montgomery. He preached it when he was candidate to join his dad at Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta. He preached it all around the country, probably 30 times. It was his favorite sermon. Now, I'm not going to quote it really. I'm going to kind of tell you the sermon. It's a great sermon. It's called the 3 dimensions of a complete life. He loved it so much, he just kept preaching it. And he used Revelation 21, what we just heard, as his text. This text about the holy city, the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. And the fact that he would pick a holy city as his text makes sense, because he was all about making cities holy. That's what he was doing. He was trying to make cities ethical and humane. Do you remember his ministry? So remember the cities he was trying to make ethical and humane, like Montgomery and Birmingham and Selma. He was trying to make cities ethical and humane. Chicago, L.A., remember what he did. You see, he knew if we could make our cities ethical and humane, then our states would become ethical and humane. And if you could make our states ethical and humane, then our nation would become ethical and humane, and then the world would be better. So he chose this text about the holy city, and at the beginning of his sermon, he says for him, this holy city symbolizes perfected humanity, perfectly ordered and just and humane. And he says, notice that the text tells us the city had perfect symmetry. Its length was the same as its height, the same as its width. And he said that each human life must have a certain symmetry, and that there are 3 dimensions that make for a complete life: the length, the width, and the height. And so he would begin this sermon talking about the length. And he would say, I don't mean how long you will live. When I'm speaking of the length dimension in your life, I don't mean how many years you will live. I mean, how far will you push forward in your life? Because he said, you have been given gifts by God. So how will you manifest your gifts? That's the length of life. How you will forge your way towards whatever you define as success, or whatever ideals you're seeking or values. He said the length of life, it matters. That you try hard to be successful in this life in whatever way you define that. That's the length. But he said the problem is you could completely lose yourself in that dimension. And every time he preached this sermon, at some point he would say, the fact is, white culture tends to lose itself in that dimension. That white culture will worry about its own success and security and safety. It'll get completely focused on that one dimension, and it will lose the fullness of life. So he would spend a few minutes talking about how if you want a complete life, you do have to seek your purposes vigorously. You've got to manifest your authentic self in this world, and it's going to take work. How far will you push forward on that? That's the length. But he said any complete life also must have breadth. And he would describe that the dimension of breadth is every human life must find some way to work for the welfare of others. Some way. It wouldn't be a complete life if you didn't do something out of a concern for the welfare of others. Now, one grace of God is as if you've ever had children. This is an amazing moment of breath, because if you've had children, you just realize now you care so much about their welfare, and you will just do about anything, right? I mean, those of us that have raised kids, that's a grace of breath. I mean, you're suddenly working all in on the welfare of others. But Martin Luther King wanted to turn the world into a family, not just your own family that you're trying to take care of. It was Martin Luther King that would say, we live in a network of mutuality, an interconnected web, and if someone else isn't doing well, I can't do well. And so for completeness of life, I have to be working for the welfare of others. And so he was trying to turn the world into a brotherhood and sisterhood. He said, you have to have that dimension in life. I had a buddy who was in Egypt last week. He just got back, and he told me as he was cruising around Cairo, his guide was Muslim. And at one point, this Muslim said to him, "Do you notice you're not seeing any homeless people?" My friend goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You won't see any homeless people around here, because if you're a Muslim, you are required by your faith. If you come across a homeless person, you have to take them home and feed them and house them." Now, I don't know if that's entirely true, but man, that is breadth, right? And we have to find ways that we're living out that kind of dimension of life, of caring for others. So you have to have length in your life. You got to have breadth. And Dr. King would spend some time talking about those elements. But it was when he got to the last element of height, you could just see his passion begin to build. Because the dimension of height, what he called the vertical dimension, is faith in God. And that if you're going to have a complete life, you have to find some way to be relating to the spiritual dimension. You have to have some kind of faith in God if it's going to be a complete life. So you have to have length. You got to seek your purposes and try to be a success. You got to have breadth and care for others, but you got to have the vertical dimension. But I think faith in God is not so easy these days. Do you know, Martin Luther King would start having a lot of passion about that when he preached, because he didn't have a faith in God at one point in his life. Do you know this? See, when Dr. Martin Luther King was a 17-year-old, he was pretty sure he was atheist. His dad was pastor of the church, right? So he's kind of a typical preacher's kid. But he was really intellectual, and he's reading all these books about atheism, and he kind of determined as a 17-year-old, I don't think I believe in God, right? So then he goes to Morehouse College, right? And as he's studying there, it comes upon him that he wants to be a minister like his dad, but not because he believed in God. He wanted to make the world a better place, and he thought, well, that's one way you could do it, become a minister and work for a better world. He still didn't think he believed in God. He went to seminary, Crozer in Pennsylvania. He even took his first church in Montgomery and was not sure he believed in God. Faith in God is not easy. It wasn't until January 27th, 1956, that he had the famous kitchen table experience. Do you remember this? This is when he came to faith. 1956. He had already been working on the Montgomery bus boycott, and it was brutal. You know, his house there got bombed. They were getting death threats all the time, and the work was just grinding. I mean, this dude was like sleeping 2 hours a night and just going full. And he came home late one night, and he was at the end of his rope, and he just was exhausted. You might not remember his whole ministry. He'd have to check himself into the hospital because this guy just went all in, right? And even now in 1956, he just is wiped out. And he comes into the house late at night, and Coretta is already asleep. And he's just standing there in the living room. He's got nothing left. And the phone rings. He picks up the phone. And it's this surly voice, "Better get out of Montgomery or we're going to kill you." He just couldn't take it anymore. He walked into the kitchen, and he says that he bowed over the kitchen table suddenly and started to pray out loud, alone. He didn't do that. Let me take you to his own words. "I was trying to think of some way I could get out of all this without being a coward. I was in a state of exhaustion. My courage was all but gone. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the table and I prayed out loud. The words I spoke to God that night are still vivid in my memory. God, I'm here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I'm afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I've got nothing left. I've come to a point where I cannot face it alone. Dr. King says at that moment, he experienced God for the first time. He said that it seemed to me as though I could hear suddenly the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, stand for justice, stand up for truth. I will be at your side. He had never experienced God. He didn't even think he believed in God. And so when he would now preach this sermon and get to the vertical dimension, he'd start to amp up because it had happened to him. He hadn't had that vertical dimension in life, and now he did. And he sensed that's what it takes for a complete life. You gotta do your life, you gotta succeed how you can, you gotta care for others, but you also have to have this vertical dimension. But I think a faith in God today is hard. Well, I think it's hard. We're so immersed in our material lives, it's consuming. You got so much you have to take care of, and there's so much busyness and hubbub. I don't think it's so much that people don't believe in God. They just don't get around to believing in God. I mean, it's like they just don't get around to it. I mean, it's like consuming our lives. It's not so much people disbelieve in God. They just don't get around to believing in God. I see it all the time. I mean, life is a lot. And so we lose that dimension. I talk to people that also just don't really care about that question at all. It's funny, they're not mean-spirited at all. It's just kind of not on their agenda. If you ask them about a faith in God, they'll just, well, I don't know. They're great people. I'm not making any value judgment, but they just don't really care. There's a cool word. It's new. The word is apatheism. Now, atheism is when you're sure you don't believe in God. Apatheism is when you just don't care, one way or another. I actually talk to a lot of apatheists. Again, awesome people. They just don't care. So the opposite of love is not hate, right? The opposite of love is indifference. Well, in a similar fashion, the opposite of faith is not disbelief. It's indifference. Just don't care, because faith is about caring. To its very essence, it's about caring. But I just sense a lot of people. Faith is hard these days. To bring that vertical dimension into your life, it's not easy. I think churches make it hard. I think churches make faith in God hard. I know that's like pathetic to say that, but I think they do. You see how churches can go so sideways, or they talk about such weird, bizarre beliefs, or whatever it is. They heap all these burdens on you, right? You go, what? Do you know what? That I think there are really only two kinds of churches in our world. Follow me. I think two kinds of churches. You've got one type of church that is super energized, and they're all jacked up about faith, and it's fun, it's awesome, and they're really relational, and they got this intensity, and it's cool, but their theology kind of sucks. I shouldn't say sucks, but it kind of sucks. They'll put down gay people, or they'll put down women, or so they got all this energy, and they got an urgency, but the theology is just, it's exclusive, and so you got this kind of church. It's really cool and it's fun, but it's off. And then you got another kind of church that has really open-minded, magnanimous ideas and is inclusive, and it's very smart and kind, but it can be kind of boring. I'm not talking about our church. Well, I might be talking about our church. There's only two, I don't know. But anyway, it seems like there's only two kinds of churches. See, I think that makes faith in God kind of hard these days. Well, I talk to people. They don't have any vertical dimension, but for some people it's because Well, they've got an ethical qualm. I get this. They'll say, well, Pastor, I hear you talk about a God of love and a God of power, but I just see a world of just suffering and tragedy and hate. How can there be a God of love and power and we got this? That's an ethical stance. I get that. But faith in God is hard. I talk to people who actually think that faith in God is an all or nothing proposition. And this is why they make it extra hard on themselves. They think it's an all or nothing proposition. You're either totally believe in God or you don't believe in God. This all or nothing fallacy is a classic logical fallacy in cognitive thinking. But people do this with faith. And I want to say to them, you can't totally believe in God. There's no way to completely believe in God because God is infinite. I mean, God is beyond our ken. God is inscrutable. You can't totally believe in God. The best you can do is believe some. It's not an all or nothing. If you even turn towards that vertical dimension, towards God, that's how it all takes place. It's not all or nothing. Oh, Martin Luther King would start getting jacked up about this because he knew that it was only complete lives that would create a complete world with all these dimensions. And so I'm saying to you today, like he said many times, don't fail to go vertical. It makes for a complete life. And you need to have a vigorous verticality. Meaning it's got to have some energy to it. It's got to have some excitement and energy, a vigorous verticality, but not just a vigorous verticality. It's got to be a versatile verticality. It's got to be your way of doing it. There's got to be versatility in this. There's going to be some particular way you will draw towards the spiritual dimension. So it's got to be vigorous verticality, but also versatile verticality, but not just that. It's also got to be veridical verticality. That means it's got to be true. It's got to be you seeking the truest, most high, beautiful things in life. So it's got to be a vigorous verticality, but also a versatile verticality and a veridical verticality, but not just that. It's also got to be a verbalized verticality because we're social beings and you have to talk to others about God. That's why we have church. That's why we have spiritual community. We are social beings. We have to talk out loud about what I'm trying to do or thinking about God or the Spirit. So it's got to be a vigorous verticality, a veridical verticality, a versatile verticality, and a verbalized verticality. Whew, that was hard to get all that in. It may not come upon you like it did Dr. King, this verticality. It might not be anything that dramatic. But my friends, if you even turn this much towards the spiritual, towards God, a new completeness of life will take place. So at 11:59, we don't use words to pray. We come and light a candle. You and I must make a pact. We must bring salvation back. Where there is love, I'll be there. There is love here. There is God here. Come forward, let's pray.
Bunitala kulonde kubando nakani muntu. Bunitala kulonde kubando nakani muntu. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kiwisa. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kiwisa kyanzambi. Nawe na luzo lolo nzambi. Nawe na luzo lolo Yesu. Bunitala kulonde kubando. Bunitala kulonde kubando. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kiwisa. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kintwari kya Yesu. Nawe oh, nawe na luzolo lwa Yesu. Bunitala kulonde kubando. Bunitala kulonde kubando. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kintwari. Beto bantu oh, beto bantu. Beto bantu oh, twaseno kintwari. Beto bantu oh, beto bantu. Beto bantu oh, beto bantu. Bunitala kulonde kubando nakani muntu.
You can stay right there. You can stay right there. Yeah. This image is coming into my mind of one of Martin Luther King's speeches. He'd had that experience of God. Now he was fully committed to a nonviolent way, and I mean all in on creating change through nonviolent resistance. And he was giving a speech to about 2,000 people, and a white man jumped up onto the stage and just punched him flush in the face. And there's 2,000 people watching. And Martin Luther King takes that shot and then drops both his hands. And the guy just starts punching him in the face. The whole crowd saw him drop his hands and just take shot after shot before they could subdue the guy. And there are witness reports from that moment saying when you see a philosophy displayed in that way, you're just changed by it. You may not realize that every week we gather around a philosophy that intense, to do no violence or no harm whatsoever, a gentleness that's beyond the imagination, but a gentleness that's fierce, trying to work for a better world. That's our Christ we meet at this table. All are welcome to this table. Simply flow into the chapel, receive the blessings, and then you have a week ahead of you to live out those three dimensions I was talking about. So this very week, hold fast to what is good. Return no one evil for evil. Find your joy in serving others. Go in peace. Amen.
And love. Emboîtons le pas d'un seul élan pour prôner l'amour, unissons-nous les uns et les autres. Oh, 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 oh. Emboîtons le pas d'un seul élan pour prôner l'amour, unissons-nous les uns et les autres. Oh, 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 oh. La paix en nous et partout dans le monde. La paix en nous et partout dans le monde. Emboîtons le pas d'un seul élan pour prôner l'amour, unissons-nous les uns et les autres. Oh, 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 oh. Emboîtons le pas d'un seul élan pour prôner l'amour, unissons-nous les uns et les autres. Oh, oh, oh. La paix en nous et partout dans le monde. La paix en nous et partout dans le monde. Africa unie dans la paix, America unie dans la paix, Europa unie dans la paix, Asia unie dans la paix, Africa unie dans la paix, America unie dans la paix, Asia unie dans la paix, Europa unie dans la paix, America unie dans la paix, Asia unie dans la paix, Africa unie dans la paix, Asia unie dans la paix. Peace and love everywhere around the world. 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 Love somebody, love somebody, love everybody, love everybody. Oh yeah, peace and love, 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 peace and love. Oh yeah, peace and love, peace and love, peace and love, peace and love, peace and love. Oh, peace and love, oh, peace and love everywhere around the world. Peace and love everywhere around the world. Love somebody, love somebody, love somebody, love somebody, love somebody, and love somebody, love somebody, love somebody. Peace and love everywhere around the world. Peace and love.